Handcrafted sausages, a dish that brings to mind juicy, fresh meat, seasoned with a blend of herbs and spices, all encased in a snappy, natural skin. It's the flavor of park picnics, cozy Sunday breakfasts with family, or local food stands at fall festivals. But what if that irresistible flavor didn't come from a secret family recipe or clean, fresh ingredients, but from a dark secret, a horrifying truth, so terrible that if you knew it, you'd never touch anything again? Our story begins in a remote part of Nebraska, a place of endless cornfields and isolated farms hidden in the quiet countryside. In Custer County, Nebraska, a land rich in agriculture but full of silent hidden corners, there was a large-scale hog farm called Miller's Homestead Sausages. It was completely isolated from the nearest town. To get there, you had to drive through vast cornfields and turn onto a narrow dirt road that was muddy in the rain and dusty in the Sunday. The farm was nestled among orchards and small creeks, almost entirely cut off from the outside world. The owner was a man in his 62nd named Frank Miller, but locals often called him Old Man Miller. His farm was well known, not just for its thousands of hogs, but also for its strange hiring practices. He exclusively hired widowed women from out of state who were in difficult financial situations to do manual labor like cooking feed and cleaning the barns. People said Old Man Miller was a kind man, compassionate toward those who had fallen on hard times. He was often praised as a savior who gave poor women a second chance. But people also whispered about how these workers came and went in a very strange way. They would work for a few months, sometimes a year, and then suddenly disappear without a word. Was this just the kindness of a compassionate boss helping struggling women find a new life? Or was there a deadly trap behind his benevolent facade? A place where unfortunate people came to make a living but never returned. The answer lay behind the farm's rusty iron gate, where the stench of the pig pens might have been hiding another smell, the scent of a terrible crime. But in a small, impoverished town in Arkansas, one person refused to let these rumors fade away. That person was Martha Jenkins, the mother of Sarah Jenkins, Old Man Miller's newest employee. For over 3 months, Martha had lived in constant worry. Her 30-year-old daughter, Sarah, a widow whose husband had died in a work accident, was raising 2 small children on her own. A year ago, she heard that Old Man Miller in Nebraska was hiring workers with room and board and a high wage, about $15 an hour, significantly more than the minimum wage in Arkansas. With a heavy heart, she left her 2 kids with her elderly mother and went to work. She had only one hope: to earn enough money to send home to her mother and give her children a better future. In the beginning, Sarah called home every week. Her voice always sounded happy. She said, "Old Man." Miller was kind and treated her like his own daughter. Her husband, Mark Miller, was a bit quiet but very gentle. The work was hard and smelly, but the pay was steady. Every month, she consistently sent home about $1,500. Then the calls became less frequent. From once a week, it became once every 2 weeks, then once a month. For more than 3 months, there had been no news at all. When Martha called her daughter's number, all she heard was a long, desolate beep, followed by a message saying the number could not be reached. She asked around with others from her hometown who worked nearby, but no one had any news. A silent fear began to grip the elderly mother. She knew her daughter's character. Sarah was responsible and loved her children dearly. There was no way she would leave without a word to her mother and her 2 children who missed her every day. Martha couldn't sleep at night. Her daughter's image haunted her restless dreams. Unable to wait any longer, she decided to go find her herself. She packed a few old clothes, asked a kind neighbor to watch her grandchildren for a few days, and took the earliest bus to Nebraska. The trip was a grueling 1,000 miles. When she arrived in Custer County, she had to ask for directions and then hire a local pickup truck driver to take her down the dirt road to Old Man Miller's farm. Standing before the rusty iron gate, looking at the silent, sprawling farm complex where the only sounds were the loud oinks of pigs and the overpowering stench, Martha's heart grew heavier. She called out at the gate for a long time before Old Man Miller came out. He still had the face of an honest, kind-hearted farmer. When he saw Martha, he seemed surprised. "Oh, who are you?" "I'm Sarah's mother, your daughter-in-law," Martha said with a trembling voice. "I came from Arkansas to see her." At this, Old Man Miller's expression changed. He seemed embarrassed and a little awkward. "Oh my, you came all this way without calling first. And Sarah, she's not here anymore. Where did she go? Martha was stunned. Just then, Mark Miller, Sarah's husband, came out of the house, his face looking tired and sad. Old man Miller sighed, his voice full of sorrow. It's not a good story, ma'am. Sarah. She found someone else. My son Mark caught them about a month ago. They had a big fight, and she packed her bags and left with him. She said she couldn't live this life anymore. The son, Mark, just stood with his head down, occasionally wiping away a tear as if to confirm his father's story. Martha was left speechless. She couldn't believe it. Her daughter wasn't that kind of person. She looked straight into old man Miller's eyes, trying to find a lie, but his eyes were calm, and his voice sounded sincere. He even invited her in for a drink, asked about her health and her grandchildren. Their kindness and the plausible story made Martha, despite her deep suspicion, unable to say anything more. She trudged away, her heart heavy with conflict. Part of her wanted to believe her daughter had made a mistake, but another part, her mother's intuition, told her that something horrific had happened behind that farm's iron gate. Leaving Old Man Miller's farm, Martha didn't return to Arkansas right away. Her worry had now turned into a certainty. Something terrible had happened to her daughter. A mother's intuition is never wrong. She couldn't believe the story the Millers had told her. She took another local bus straight to the Custer County Sheriff's Office. Sitting in the reception room with trembling hands, she filed a missing person report. She not only reported the disappearance of her daughter, Sarah Jenkins, but also recounted the entire story, expressing her deep suspicions about the hog farmer Frank Miller and his son, Mark. Upon receiving the report, the Custer County Sheriff's Office opened a case file and began preliminary investigations as per standard procedure. 2 investigators were sent to Old Man Miller's farm to interview the men again. This time, it was official. Facing the police, the Millers maintained a cooperative and eerily calm demeanor. Old Man Miller repeated the exact same story he had told Martha, without a single discrepancy or nervous gesture. He even expressed sympathy for the elderly mother's worry and promised to provide any information if needed. "It's so hard, officers," he sighed. "My family was happy until she listened to outsiders. My son Mark has been a wreck for months. We've tried to contact her, but we can't. She must have changed her number, determined to cut ties." The son, Mark, continued to play the role of a betrayed husband. He showed the investigators old text messages of arguments and described how his wife had packed up her clothes and left. The investigators checked the small room where Sarah and Mark had lived. The room was empty and had been cleaned to a ridiculous degree. There were no personal belongings, no photos, not a single strand of Sarah's hair left behind. Everything seemed to have been staged to support their story of her running away. The initial investigation hit a dead end. There was no crime scene, no witnesses, no signs of foul play. The suspect's testimonies were logical and consistent down to every detail. The case was temporarily classified as a routine missing persons case. The investigators were partly convinced that due to family disputes, Sarah had left with another man without telling her family, a scenario not uncommon for women in her situation. Time passed, and the file for Sarah Jenkins' disappearance gathered dust in the sheriff's backlog. But one person never gave up. Every month, Martha would make the journey from Arkansas to Nebraska, a trip of over 1,000 miles. The elderly mother, her hair now much grayer, would return to the sheriff's office, her eyes full of tears, asking for news of her daughter. This elderly woman's tireless determination, combined with the case's unusual details, eventually caught the attention of the Nebraska State Patrol, NSP. They sensed that there were too many unanswered questions behind the daughter-in-law ran-off story. The NSP director decided that not even the smallest suspicion could be ignored. They ordered the Criminal Investigation Division to reopen the case and conduct a thorough new investigation. The horrific secret buried behind the hog farm's gate was about to be uncovered by the state's most elite investigators. Chief Investigator David Peterson, a veteran detective and a seasoned fox of criminal investigations with hundreds of complex cases under his belt, was put in charge of the task force. He didn't believe in coincidences. As he reread the thin case file on Sarah's disappearance, he immediately noticed the cracks in the perfect play the Millers had constructed. Could a mother who loved her children so much leave without a word to her own family? Could a weak, timid son calmly accept his wife cheating and leaving after just one argument? And why was a boss so sympathetic and well-versed in his employees' private affairs? These questions swirled in the chief investigator's mind. His instincts told him the answer wasn't with Sarah, but with Frank Miller's farm itself. He decided to completely change the direction of the investigation. Instead of just focusing on one missing person, he ordered his team to dig into all the personnel records and find out about all the women who had worked at the Miller farm in the last 5 years. A silent but intense investigation had begun. The task Peterson assigned to his team was incredibly difficult. Frank Miller hired workers haphazardly, with almost no formal contracts or paperwork. All the information about previous employees was a handful of scribbled names and hometowns in an old notebook. It took the detectives weeks to compile a list of all the female workers who had been at the farm, and then they started a grueling journey to find those women. Special task forces were sent to states across the South and West, following the faintest of trails. They went to the hometowns noted in the old papers. They met with the families of each woman, and a terrifying, repetitive pattern began to emerge. In a poor town in New Mexico, they found the brother of Maria Sanchez, a widow who had gone to work for Old Man Miller in 2020. The man with a weary face recalled, "She worked there for about a year and sent money home regularly. She said the boss was good, the job was steady. Then she just went silent. My family went there to look for her, and Old Man Miller said she'd gone to Texas with a man. We believed it because she was young, and we hoped she'd find another husband to rely on. We haven't heard anything since." This story was eerily similar to the one Miller had told Sarah's mother. In Louisiana, the story of Lena Johnson, a Creole woman, was also the same. Lena's mother said her daughter lost contact after about 8 months at the hog farm. When she called, Old Man Miller said Lena had gone back to her late husband's family in Mississippi because someone there was very ill and needed care. The lies were cleverly crafted to fit each person's circumstances. The reports from the task forces kept coming in. One woman was said to have won the lottery and left to enjoy her winnings. Another was said to have crossed the border to work abroad. Another was said to have returned to her ex-husband. 6 women, plus Sarah Jenkins, made 7. All had the same characteristics: widowed, in difficult financial situations, from distant states. All worked for Frank Miller for a period of a few months to a year, and all then quit to find a new life, with various explanations before disappearing without a trace. Their families, being far away, trusting the kind boss's words, or simply too poor to do anything more, had never vigorously reported their loved ones as missing. In the task force's meeting room, Chief Investigator David Peterson placed the photos of the 7 women on a whiteboard. 7 smiles, 7 fates, now all haunting, major questions. The air in the room was thick. "This is no longer a coincidence," Chief Investigator Peterson said. His voice was low and filled with outrage. 7 women, the same story. We are dealing with a serial killer. His statement was like a thunderclap. The case had been elevated to a whole new level. Frank Miller's farm wasn't a workplace. It was a death trap, a devil's lair, and it was very likely a mass grave. But the biggest question remained, one that stumped all the investigators. Where were the bodies? Without bodies, it was nearly impossible to charge a cunning man like Old Man Miller. He could easily deny everything, claiming it was all a coincidence, that he couldn't control the private lives of his employees. The task force was facing a wall of silence, a nearly perfect crime with no witnesses, no crime scene, and no victims. Even with evidence of the mass disappearance of the female workers and unusual financial patterns, the team knew that without a body or a direct piece of physical evidence, charging Frank Miller with murder would be incredibly difficult. He could always claim he had nothing to do with their private lives, that he didn't know where they went after they quit. The facade of a kind, honest farmer was still too strong. Chief Investigator David Peterson knew that to solve this case, they couldn't just investigate from the outside. They needed a breakthrough from inside the lion's den. The discovery of the trunk filled with the victims' belongings was a huge morale boost for the entire task force. They now had the first undeniable physical evidence directly connecting Frank Miller to the disappearance of the 10 women. The photos of these items, when shown to the victims' families, turned their faint hope into wails of grief and outrage. They now knew for certain that their loved ones had been harmed. Meanwhile, on the farm, Agent Olivia Reed continued her mission, which was becoming more dangerous by the day. After reporting on the trunk, she received new instructions from Chief Investigator Peterson. Absolutely no reckless actions. Your safety is the priority. Your job now is to observe and report any suspicious areas and behaviors of the subject. Olivia, as Anna, continued her work diligently, acting unassuming and not curious. But her eyes never stopped observing. She reported back to the task force that the most suspicious area, the one that made her feel the most uneasy on the entire farm, was the feed processing building. It was a large workshop built separately, and inside were a powerful industrial grinder and huge cast iron pots used for cooking feed. Frank Miller absolutely forbade anyone, not even the long-time male workers, from entering this area. He always did the feed processing himself, and often did it at night. Many nights from her room, Olivia heard the grinder running for hours, and she smelled a strange, acrid odor coming from it. A strong, pungent, metallic smell that wasn't like corn feed or vegetables. It made her nauseous and sent a shiver down her spine. She had a hunch that this was the slaughterhouse, the place where the unfortunate women were processed. Realizing the situation was becoming increasingly dangerous for the detective, and with enough initial evidence, Chief Investigator Peterson decided it was time to act. But he needed scientific proof, something undeniable, to legally and comprehensively obtain a search warrant. Based on the theory of body disposal, he instructed the economic investigation team to speed up their work. They were no longer just looking at bank accounts. This time, they focused on finding anomalies in the farm's purchase orders. The detectives went through hundreds of invoices for everything from livestock and feed to agricultural supplies over the past 5 years, and they finally found it. When reviewing invoices from industrial chemical suppliers in neighboring states, they discovered a horrifying truth. For many years, Frank Miller had been consistently purchasing very large amounts of sodium hydroxide, commonly known as lye, and concentrated sulfuric acid. These were extremely powerful chemicals capable of rapidly corroding and dissolving organic tissue and bones. The amount Miller purchased far exceeded the normal sanitation needs of a hog farm. No matter how large a farm was, it couldn't need hundreds of gallons of acid and hundreds of pounds of lye every year. To be sure, the task force consulted a chemistry expert from the University of Nebraska. The expert confirmed that these were 2 of the chemicals most often used in the most thorough methods of biological evidence destruction. They could turn a human body into an unrecognizable liquid. The most horrific theory had been laid out. Frank Miller didn't just kill, dismember, and grind the bodies for hog feed. He also used powerful chemicals to dissolve and destroy the remaining parts, ensuring not a single trace of the victims would exist. With the evidence of him possessing the victims' belongings, combined with the purchase of a large amount of body-dissolving chemicals, the Nebraska State Attorney's Office did not hesitate to immediately approve an emergency search warrant for Frank Miller's entire farm. The net was closing in. The devil's hunt was about to end. Early one morning, with fog still covering the cornfields of Custer County, hundreds of state troopers, state patrol, and detectives secretly surrounded Frank Miller's hog farm. All entry and exit roads were blocked off. A net was cast, waiting for the devil to fall into it. Agent Olivia Reed, the brave undercover detective, had received the signal and safely withdrew from the farm the night before. Her mission was a complete success. At 6 a.m., the order to raid was given. The team stormed in from multiple directions, neutralizing Miller's workers. A special team broke into the feed processing building where Miller often stayed overnight. Frank Miller was inside, completely surprised to see the police. The instinct of a beast took over. He grabbed a cleaver used for chopping bones, ready to fight back wildly, but he had no chance. The detectives, with their training and courage, quickly took him down, disarmed him, and put him in handcuffs. The demon in a kind farmer's disguise had finally been captured. A comprehensive search was conducted immediately afterward. In the main house, in addition to the trunk full of victims' belongings that Olivia had reported, police found another sick collection. Dozens of pairs of women's underwear carefully stored in a metal box hidden under the bed. This was undeniable evidence of the killer's disturbed mind. But the place that made everyone shudder, the place that revealed the most brutal truth, was the feed processing workshop. To the naked eye, the area looked normal, with only the characteristic stench of hog feed and pig pens. But when the forensic team used luminol solution and a blacklight, a horrifying scene appeared. The entire concrete floor, the walls around the industrial grinder, and especially the inside of the huge cast iron pots glowed with an eerie blue light. Countless bloodstains, despite being meticulously cleaned with lye and acid, appeared like ghosts exposing the crimes. This was not a place to prepare hog feed. This was a slaughterhouse, a place for human executions. Blood samples were collected immediately. The subsequent forensic analysis showed the DNA of many different people, but their identities could not be specified as the samples had been mixed and decomposed by chemicals. But where were the victims' bodies? Why was there so much blood without a single bone to be found? All eyes now turned to the large, ominous-looking catfish pond behind the house. Based on the most terrifying scenario they had imagined, the task force decided to drain the pond. This was an incredibly difficult task. State police had to bring in multiple high-capacity pumps and even the fire department to help. After more than 2 days and a night of non-stop pumping, the pond, which was thousands of square feet wide, was finally just a layer of black mud. And in that foul mud, white human bone fragments began to emerge. Forensic experts had to work in extremely difficult conditions to collect every piece. They found countless fragments of skulls, ribs, arm bones, and leg bones belonging to at least 11 different people. This pond wasn't just a place to raise fish. It was a mass grave, a place to hide the remains of unforgivable crimes. After the victims' flesh had been ground up and fed to the herd of thousands of pigs, the truth was finally revealed, brutal and heinous beyond all imagination. At the police station, faced with the undeniable evidence, the trunk full of victims' belongings, the bloodstains that could not be erased in the slaughterhouse, and especially the skeletons found in his own fish pond, Frank Miller knew that any denial was useless. He no longer played the role of the kind, honest owner. The mask had completely fallen. He sat there, his hands cuffed to the table, in an unsettling silence. Chief Investigator David Peterson didn't need to ask many questions. He just quietly placed the photos of the belongings, the bone fragments, and the images of the 11 unfortunate women on the table in front of Miller. After a long, suffocating silence, Miller finally looked up. He didn't look at the chief investigator but at the photos, a faint, twisted smile on his lips, and then he spoke. His voice was dry, monotonous, without any remorse or emotion. His confession was a horrifying story of a man with a twisted psyche and a sick hatred for women. He said his tragedy began years ago when his wife, whom he loved dearly, left him for another man. That betrayal planted a seed of hatred in his heart. He began to hate all women. In his eyes, they were all deceitful, unfaithful, only caring about money and new relationships. He began to form a plan for revenge, a sick revenge targeting women in the same situation as his ex-wife. He chose to hire widowed women in difficult situations because he believed they were the most vulnerable and easily manipulated. And more importantly, when they disappeared, fewer people would care to look for them. He recounted in detail every murder he had committed over the last 5 years. His method was always a repeated pattern. First, he would act kind and caring to gain their trust. After the prey completely trusted him, he would find a way to assault them. The poor women, alone and far from home, were initially too scared to fight back. But when one of them tried to leave or threatened to go to the police, the demon within him would awaken, and he wouldn't hesitate to kill them to silence them. "They came here to take advantage of me," Miller said, his voice still monotonous, "so I had to show them the price of betrayal." He admitted that after killing the victims, he would take their bodies to the feed processing building. There, in his own personal slaughterhouse, he used the same tools he used to butcher pigs to dismember them. The flesh and organs. He paused for a moment as if savoring the horror of his words. "I put them in the industrial grinder, ground them up with vegetables, and then put them in the big pots to cook into feed for my thousands of pigs. And the bones," he continued chillingly. "After boiling them clean and using chemicals to get rid of all traces, I put them in sacks and dumped them into the catfish pond to hide the evidence." He believed this was the most perfect way to hide the evidence, a sick cycle he had created himself. Those he considered leeches had finally become feed, and no one would ever find a trace. Frank Miller's chilling confession closed one of the most brutal and disturbing cases in Nebraska history. The discovery of the mass grave and the grotesque method of body disposal sent shockwaves across the nation. The story of Miller's Homestead sausages, once known for its quality handcrafted products, became a national headline, a nightmare that gripped the entire country. The media labeled Frank Miller, the sausage killer, and his farm, once a symbol of the American heartland, was now a monument to evil. The case brought to light the vulnerability of women in isolated situations and the importance of a mother's intuition. Martha Jenkins, the determined mother, became a symbol of hope and persistence in the face of despair. Her refusal to give up on her daughter's case ultimately brought justice not only for Sarah but for all the other women who had disappeared.